With my eyes fixed on his, I rose slowly to my feet. The intensity of his stare gave me the strength to face whatever that came my way. I reached down and loosened the tiny knot that had been slung around my waist in a single motion. With a subtle grace, the crimson gown dipped to my feet. I couldn't take my gaze off of Charles's. Seeing his expression, a blend of astonishment, adoration, and desire, bolstered my confidence even further. Perhaps, I whispered with a hint of a smile, "You need not stand by the sidelines any longer. By the way, you're also here." I chose to share it because I was simply thinking back on what happened. In order for you to fully grasp how everything came to pass, allow me to begin at the very beginning. Standing in front of the mirror in my dimly lit room, I changed into something cozier that evening as the sun was setting, giving a warm warmth over everything. I glanced in the mirror as I removed the garment off my shoulders and froze. Every aspect was scrutinized as I gazed intently. An enduring woman who was full of life and strength even after all these years. Whispering to myself with a gentle grin, I called out to Angela, "You're stunningly beautiful and youthful." Even though I was carrying a little extra weight in my life, I managed to keep the radiance in my eyes. That obvious presence, that aura that caused people to stop in their tracks unconsciously. I sensed a subtle stirring within me, a long-repressed emotion. Perhaps I was beginning to feel like myself again after those dull years with Fred as my spouse. After that, an emotion or look grabbed my attention. Charles was standing outside my window when I turned my head. He was observing me via the open drapes. My heart began racing the second our gazes locked. My cheeks flushed with a surge of embarrassment. In a panic, I snatched my dress and drew the curtain closed. In that very moment, though, I became aware of another emotion, being observed, adored, or watched, hidden behind the shame. It was a sensation I hadn't had in a long time, and it reawakened an innate, unmistakably feminine part of me. Subscribing and activating alerts will put you in the front of the line to hear these kinds of stories, and will also help me grow, so that I can share even more with you. Embark on a journey unlike any other with this captivating tale. Even as I drew the drapes shut and stepped back from the window, my heart continued to race. However, I felt a stirring within, a feeling that this wasn't going away with a single glance. Somehow I sensed it. A lot more was to come from this, but this was just the beginning. It was like a race in my head. At the age of 61, I died. Looking at my age in the mirror made me feel young even though I knew it was there. I still feel the void that Fred's death 7 years ago created in my life. No tender moments have been shared during our marriage. It was more of a pattern, boring, silent, and leaving me with the constant sense that something was lacking. I moved into this duplex with a glimmer of hope that things may improve after 2 years of being alone. I met Charles at that moment. Charles, a 65-year-old with an imposing presence. It was hard to look away from him due to his large stature, and the way his eyes illuminated a room. Both of his eyes. Look at those eyes. No one would dare peer into their eyes, but once they did, they couldn't take their gaze off. Within 15 years, I learned he had been a widower. Whether it was chatting about garden flowers or exchanging a few words beside the mailbox, we always managed to have brief, informal discussions. However, I could sense his presence in every part of my body whenever he was nearby. And that electric charge was unavoidable every time our gazes connected. That expression told me it was all different today. I was noticed by Charles. Perhaps at one instant, all the things I had been repressing and covering up for years finally surfaced. We could no longer maintain our previously unsaid bond in silence. Our story truly began at this point. On that particular evening, as I got out of the shower, an inexplicable sensation, almost a premonition, came over me. I dug out some old clothes that I hadn't worn in years for some reason. For someone my age, I didn't mind if they were a little too daring. I put on the long figure-hugging red dress and the red lace underwear. Something within me roused as I beheld my reflection in the mirror. Do I truly look 65? I pondered. Yet the solution was already clear to me. There would be a change tonight. A rap on the door interrupted my descent from the stairs. I felt a sudden racing heart. How late is it? Who could it be? I got ready to go by smoothing the hem of my dress and fixing my hair. Charles, all stocky and armed with a pair of shears, was standing there when I opened it. His beady eyes swept over me in an instant, and that expression, my goodness, it was hard to escape. No words could express his awe. He offered me the scissors he had lent me the other day for the flowers and remarked, with a little smile, that I should give them back. As always, his voice had a rich, comforting quality. My voice trembled as I tried to say thank you, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring at me the whole time. He appeared to be going to turn around and return to his place for a brief period. A light bulb went off in my head as he started to walk toward his house. "Charles, would you like a coffee?" I asked, my bravery having triumphed above all reason. I couldn't control my racing heart as the words from my lips. A mixture of astonishment and a gentle smile graced Charles's face as he slowly turned around. We both knew this wasn't going to be any ordinary moment the second our gazes connected. Charles softly grinned, his eyes welcoming and friendly. His voice betrayed his genuine want to. "Having coffee with a stunning woman like you is an invitation no one could refuse." Like a spark lighting a fire, his words swept through me, making me feel warm and fuzzy within. I invited him inside with a subtle grin. I gestured for him to come inside as I escorted him to the living area. With each stride, I could sense Charles's presence as he trailed behind me. I told him to have a seat in the living room and went to get something from the kitchen. "Is sugar a common addition to your coffee?" My voice was softer than normal as I inquired. He settled into the chair and said, "No, thank you. I prefer it black. However, I'm confident that sharing it with you will enhance its sweetness." My cheeks turned red because I was taken aback by that compliment. Out of the corner of my eye, I stole a modest smile and peered at him. Charles kept a close eye on me as I brought the tray back to the living room. From the moment I stepped away to the moment I placed the coffee cups on the table, his eyes were fixed on me. Everything about me, from the intricate intricacies of my attire to my movements and the care with which I held the cups, appeared to enthrall him. Seated across from him, I set the tray on the coffee table. "Angela, you look absolutely stunning tonight," Charles murmured as he lifted his cup and met my gaze. My voice quivered a little as I expressed my gratitude. "Charles, you look absolutely stunning. I believe it's fair to say that both of us have left an impression this evening." Charles placed his coffee cup on the table after taking a small sip. His voice had dipped a bit, but he still had something to say to Angela. "You're different today, even though I've known you for a long time. Some aspect of you has always stood out to me, perhaps because I've never had the opportunity to observe you up close like this." Looking at him, I expressed my amazement and flattery at his unexpected interest, adding that it also piqued my curiosity. Even though we've lived in close proximity for quite some time, I still took a few moments to observe him. Such a discussion has never taken place between us. Charles smiled slightly. "Perhaps the moment was never perfect, or maybe," he remarked, his gaze sweeping over me. "It seems like the time is now. I've been waiting for the perfect opportunity." Warmth emanated from all directions in the room. The emphasis on our words was equal to that of the pauses between them. Charles had an air of dominance even when seated. The tension between us was intensified by his intense stare and slightly stiff but sincere body language. His voice became increasingly solemn as he spoke to Angela. "You are more than a stunning woman in my eyes. You seem fierce, bright, and full of life based on what little I know about you. That's why I've always looked up to you." His remarks made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. It was as if I had reawakened an emotion that I had repressed for a long time. Something more profound, a fervor and interest. In a low voice, I thanked you, Charles. It means a lot to me to hear supportive words from you. There was an unseen bond between us that I could feel at that very second. The conversation was becoming hotter, but our coffees were getting cold. There was candor and an invitation in Charles's eyes, and I was prepared to give in to a pull I hadn't experienced in a long time. I mustered up my bravery as I glanced at Charles and described the happenings of the morning, smiling slightly. As if he were anticipating my next move, he kept staring at me. My voice was low and calm as I addressed Charles. "You seemed to be keeping an eye on me earlier today. I can only imagine how tough it was for you at that time." His expression changed from surprise to astonished. His jaw dropped as he tried to speak, but he choked. In an awkward gesture, he looked away and sipped his coffee again. I mustered the fortitude I required from his reluctance. I offered a gentle laugh and told him not to be ashamed. If I'm being completely forthright, I really enjoyed it. With a mix of astonishment and intrigue. His attention quickly returned to me. My adrenaline was now churning at an uncontrollable pace. While maintaining eye contact with him, I expressed the need to confess something. I've also kept an eye on you. There have been times when I've peered out the window or noticed you tending to the garden and you caught my eye. I was elated because I am a woman. Charles seemed speechless as he glanced at me. I felt compelled to be forthright now that any timidity I had earlier had evaporated. The fact that I've been keeping tabs on you is something I can't begin to fathom, I spoke on. Still, it got me thinking, and I'll admit it. It made me feel beautiful to know that you observed me this morning. I rose slowly to my feet. I felt a newfound sense of courage as I maintained eye contact with him, and the intensity of his stare bolstered my resolve. I reached for the delicate knot that cinched my dress and with a single gesture uncinched it. Silently, the red dress dripped from my figure and down to my feet. I couldn't take my gaze off of Charles's. He inspired me with his expression, which was a blend of astonishment, admiration, and want. I spoke softly, smiling, and suggested that maybe you shouldn't remain on the sidelines any longer. With wonder in his eyes, Charles stared at me the whole time. His silence lasted a few seconds, as if he were unable to put into words the enormity of what he was witnessing. His voice, which was slightly trembling, finally broke the silence. How on earth is this even conceivable, Angela? He looked me over from head to toe as he spoke. You seem completely unaffected by the passage of time. How fresh and full of life you appear. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I felt both embarrassment and confidence as a result of his remarks. Approaching with a gentle smile, I drew nearer, maintaining constant eye contact. My voice was quiet yet firm when I addressed Charles. Perhaps nobody else has ever seen me in this light but you. I moved closer to him as he fumbled for words. With his voice getting lower, he replied, I used to fall asleep thinking about this. This vitality, this grace you. Now though for me to be in the thick of things this must be a dream. I let out a little laugh as a twinkle appeared in my eyes. As I gently rested my hand on his chest, I whispered, a dream. Then I suppose it's my responsibility to keep you from waking up. Carefully, I unfastened the first button on his shirt. As he watched my every action, Charles's respiration became faster. I added when I pressed the second button that it's more lifelike than anything you could have imagined. I could feel the electric current between us as soon as my fingertips touched his skin. His strong, broad chest was exposed as each button was undone. A tremor began to creep into Charles's breathing. In a voice that was scarcely audible, he murmured to Angela. By delicately placing a finger on his lips, I was able to hush him. Does it seem real to you, Charles? Looking deeply into his eyes, I tilted my head and asked, is the truth now beginning to sink in? I cautiously made my way back to the couch and dove into the plush cushions, my eyes fixed on his. I stood at an angle to him, my eyes gleaming with a combination of confidence and want. Charles, I whispered, my voice filled with intensity. You've given me a rush of energy that I haven't felt in years. All in the span of 5 minutes. As if he was still struggling to believe this was happening, Charles's expression shifted between astonishment and incredulity. I resumed after taking a deep breath and a little smile. I assure you this is just the start. My eyes were both warm and determined as I extended a hand toward him. I implore you, kindly come here. The atmosphere between us became thicker with those few words. Charles stood still for an instant. Then he stepped forward, a look of resolve flashing in his eyes. We both understood at that exact second that our shared history of isolation and remorse had brought us to this point of beginning anew. Charles walked slowly, staring straight at me the whole time. I could practically feel his breath as he drew near. There was a complete cessation of time. We were alone in the room, taking in the electric vibes. His palms barely touched my sides. A surge of energy coursed through my entire being as a result of the warmth of his touch. His reluctance was evident in his expression as he maintained eye contact with mine. His voice was low and raspy as he spoke to Angela. The words simply wouldn't come out of his mouth, even though he seemed to have a lot to say. I cocked my head ever so slightly and murmured something. I delicately ran my fingertips down his cheek. Charles, there is a time for everything, and words aren't necessary to describe how I feel right now. That was the last straw that broke the seal on our relationship. At first, His lips lightly and cautiously touched mine. In an instant, though, any reluctance vanished, and a passionate kiss brimming with unfiltered intensity took its place. I felt my heart pounding uncontrollably. I had repressed longings that were reawakened by Charles's touch. As he drew me nearer, his hands went down my neck to my waist, and then back to my face. There was a sense of having left behind our worries, disappointments, and regrets at that very instant. No one or nothing else was more important than Charles and me. I reached out and touched his chest as our kiss intensified. Because of his strong physique, I felt safe and energized all at once. He briefly broke from the kiss and whispered something to Angela. "Wow, you're just incredible. Could this possibly be true?" I couldn't contain the enthusiasm building up inside of me as I gazed into his eyes with a smile. I did say yes, Charles. Yes, this is happening, and it's only the start. At that same second, we were both aware that the bond we shared was unlike any other we had experienced. Our burden from the past had been lifted. This very second, consumed by emotion and the excitement of discovery, was all that ever was. With my eyes closed, I let myself to experience everything. There was an overwhelming feeling. It was so different from everything I had ever done before that it was like experiencing life for the first time. Despite this, it was both delicate and rich. As if he were offering me his worries, every time I opened my eyes to look, I would see him peering into mine. It had inherent value. There were moments when our connection was rapid and passionate, and other times when it was gentle and patient. Although it was my first, I knew it wouldn't be my last. Charles also seemed to exude an air of self-assuredness. I knew when I opened my eyes later that night to see Charles sound asleep next to me. Discovering the aspirations, passions, and experiences that we seek in life might often take a considerable amount of time. Even when it's excruciating, time compels us to wait. However, such extended periods teach us to savor each moment when it arrives. And perhaps the most memorable part is being there at the perfect moment with the right person. I can tell my narrative had a profound effect on you because you've come this far. You won't want to miss a single detail since there's a lot more to tell. Please consider following this story, enabling notifications, and leaving a comment. Please let us have a conversation. I am eager to hear your opinion.